Hi again guys, and welcome to another returning look at the past of Forza Motorsport, some of the coolest cars which are no longer featured in the franchise. And this is one of my personal favourite cars from Forza 4 in particular. It's a DLC car from one of the car packs, and just like another DLC car which we will feature later in this series, the Lincoln Continental, this is not only one of my favourite cars in the game, but also one of my favourite cars in real life as well. Because when it comes to dream cars and favourite cars here on the channel, I tend to talk about the same couple of vehicles a lot. In particular the Ferrari FF, which is my basically absolute dream car, and then very close behind that, the Sauvage Rival, which is basically a more oddball version of the same concept. This one though, I don't talk about as much, but I have a lot of love for it, because this car, the 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz, is what I would call my real-world dream car, in as much as it's still a vehicle which I would love to own more than a lot of others, but it's a lot more attainable than something like an FF. And I'm sure many of you guys who are fans of cars and petrol heads also have your real-world dream vehicles, something which wouldn't necessarily be your pick above all others, but would be your affordable pick. And that is what this car is for me. It's not the most affordable thing in the world, but it's a lot more affordable than a Ferrari or a Sauvage Rival. Now, the car is not designed for performance really in any sense. It's huge, it has a massive wheelbase, it's extremely heavy, and it's not exactly that quick, in a similar way to the Lincoln, at least in their stock forms. It's an F-Class vehicle, surprise, surprise, but it's also quite high in the F-Class, 182, so you can't do a huge amount to it before bumping it up into the next class. At the same time though, the power and torque which it has for the lowest class in the game is actually quite good, because the engine in this car was pretty much the best thing that Cadillac had on offer at the time. 6.4 litre V8, it's naturally aspirated, so no turbos, no superchargers, putting out 345 horsepower and 435 pound-feet of torque. Those are good numbers, especially for a car which doesn't really need numbers that good. So it's more powerful, for instance, than the Lincoln, which has around 300 horsepower from a bigger engine, a 7 litre. Now the weight on this one is, again, just like the Continental, very heavy. In fact, it weighs as much as a modern day Bentley Continental GT at 2.3 tons, 2,295 kilos, which I can't recall exactly what that is in pounds, but I believe it's well over 5,000. So it's a very heavy car, and it's a very big car. The horsepower per ton, though, is not too bad. It puts out 150. Now that may not sound that great in a world of sports cars and supercars and race cars, but to put that into some perspective, that's actually the same horsepower per ton as a first generation Audi TT Quattro. That's not bad, considering that that is a much quicker small sports coupe. Now of course the Audi isn't quite as powerful as this, but that's the result. Of course this one would have to have more power to match its horsepower per ton, so the fact that it does match that at all is quite impressive. At the same time though, of course, a car that's as big and as heavy as this, with an automatic gearbox, even as standard, I believe it's a 3-speed if memory serves, of course, it's not going to be all that quick. It's not designed to be all that quick. It's much more of a novelty piece, an oddball piece, a car for aficionados of the brand, but also specifically of this kind of car. These borderline vintage luxury classics, which tend to get lumped in with muscle cars on most racing games, but at the same time, it's not a muscle car, really, in any sense. But people just put it in that crowd because that's basically the closest thing that it comes to. However, don't let that fool you. The Cadillac, along with the Lincoln, definitely have potential, because this car, when tuned, especially when it comes to stuff like stiffening up the suspension, giving it more powerful brakes, more gears to work with, and of course dropping the weight, you will be surprised by how good this car can be. Now of course, I'm not saying it's going to beat everything in its way in any particular class, but it has the potential to, and at the very least, given that it doesn't need that potential at all to be a cool car anyway, having any potential, especially in lower classes, makes it useful. Now, as I said, you're not going to beat everything. There are plenty of cars that can beat it, But at the same time, showing up in this car is a bit like on the newer Forza games showing up in something like the Cadillac XTS limo, or the Ford Transit Supervan, or the Mercedes tank pool racing truck. It's not the best thing out there, of course not, but that's not the point. It's just stupid, silly fun. That is exactly what this car embodies, and in the real world, my dream spec for this car incidentally would be slammed to the ground on white wall tyres, red leather interior, and probably finished in a deep, metallic Joker purple. Not necessarily an obvious spec, but that's probably what I'd go for. In terms of performance, I wouldn't upgrade it at all, but that would be my dream spec for this car. In terms of racing use, well, as I touched on just now, it has some, but I wouldn't necessarily go into it expecting that. Now, one word of caution, you'd probably assume that being a big, long, old rear-wheel drive American car, that it would be pretty good at drifting. But actually, not necessarily. In a similar way to the Lincoln, it's actually so long and so awkward that it can be quite difficult to get its tail out and to hold a drift. It can drift, don't get me wrong, but you'll need to do a bit to it for it to really hold drifts and to have a lot of fun with it properly. But that's it overall for this particular pick. Certainly one of my favourite cars in the game, and I would love to see this car return. But I'll see you guys next time, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.